Welcome to JC Reads. I'm glad you're here. Today's selection is a subscriber request. If you have a request that you would like to hear read, please leave us a comment in the comment section on any of the videos. The only real factor right now at this moment is whether or not it's in the public domain. The Signalman by Charles Dickens. Relax while I read us this story. "Hello, under there!" When he heard a voice accordingly calling to him, he was standing at the door of his field with a flag in his hand, furled circular its quick pole. One would have proposal, seeing that the nature of the bottom, that he would not have doubted from what quarter the voice came, but as an alternative of looking up to the place I stood on top of the steep, chopping practically over his head, he grew to become himself about and seemed down the line. There used to be something great in his method of doing so, although I might not have stated for my existence what. However, I are aware of it was once splendid, ample to attract my observe, even though his determine was once foreshortened and shadowed down within the deep trench, and mine used to be high above him, so steeped within the glow of an angry sunset that I had shaded my eyes with my hand before I saw him in any respect. "Hello, below!" From looking down the road, he turned himself about again, and, elevating his eyes, saw my figure high above him. "Is there any path through which I will come down to speak to you?" He regarded up at me without replying, and that I regarded down at him without pressing him too soon with a repetition of my idle query. Just then there came a distinct vibration within the earth and air, speedily changing into a violent pulsation, and an oncoming rush that induced me to start back, as if it had force to attract me down. When such vapor rose to my height from this fast Teach had passed me by, and was once skimming away over the landscape, I looked down again and noticed him refurling the flag he had proven at the same time to instruct went by. I repeated my inquiry. After a pause, in the course of which he appeared to regard me with fixed attention, he motioned with his rolled-up flag toward a factor on my level, some 200 or 300 yards far away. I referred to as down to him, all proper, and made for that point. There, by way of dint of watching intently about me, I determined a difficult zigzag descending course notched out, which I adopted. The reducing used to be incredibly steep and surprisingly precipitate. It was made through a clammy stone that grew to be oozier and wetter as I went down. For these motives I determined the best way lengthy enough to provide me time to consider a singular air, reluctance, or compulsion with which he had brought up the path. Once I came down low enough upon the zigzag descent to see him once more, I saw that he was standing once between the rails on the way in which wherein the coach had lately handled, in an perspective as if he had been ready for me to appear. He had his left hand at his chin, and that left elbow rested on his right hand, crossed over his breast. His angle was once one of such expectation and watchfulness that I ended a moment, questioning at it. I resumed my downward approach, and stepping out upon the level of the railroad, and drawing nearer to him, saw that he was a depressing sallow man, with a dismal beard and alternatively heavy eyebrows. His publish was in as solitary and dismal situation as ever I saw. On both sides a dripping wet wall of jagged stone, except for all view, however, a strip of sky, the perspective a method, only a crooked prolongation of this fine dungeon, the shorter perspective in the different course terminating in the dark red light, and the gloomier entrance into a black tunnel, in whose significant architecture there was a barbarous, miserable, and forbidding air. So little sunlight ever discovered its way to the spot that it had an earthy, lethal scent, and a lot bloodless wind rushed by way of it, that it struck sit back to me as if I had left the common world. Earlier than he stirred, I used to be close sufficient to him to have touched him. Now, not even disposing of his eyes from mine, he stepped again one step and lifted his hand. This was a lonesome submit to occupy, I stated, and it had riveted my awareness after I looked down from up yonder. A tourist was a rarity, will I have to think, no longer an unwelcome rarity, I hoped. In me he purely noticed a person who had been shut up inside slim limits all his life, and who, being at last let out, had a newly awakened curiosity in these nice works. To such rationale I spoke to him. However, I am a ways from definite of the phrases I used, for besides that I am now not glad in opening any conversation, there was once anything within that man that daunted me. He directed a most curious appear in the direction of the purple light close the tunnel's mouth, and looked all about it, as if something were lacking from it, after which it looked at me. That light was once a part of his cost. Was once it not? He answered in a low voice, "Don't you know it is?" The titanic suggestion came into my mind as I perused the fixed eyes and the saturnine face that was his spirit, no longer a person. I've speculated considering that, whether there will have been illness in my mind. In my turn I stepped back. However, in making the motion, I detected in his eyes some latent fear of me. This put the substantial idea to flight. "You seem at me," I said, forcing a smile, "as should you had a dream of me." I was dubious, he back, whether I had obvious you earlier then. "Where?" He pointed to the purple gentle he had checked out. "There," I mentioned. Closely watchful of me, he spoke back, however, without sound, "Sure." "My excellent fellow, what should I do there? None the less, be that as it may, I on no account used to be there. You may also swear." "I think I may just," he rejoined. "Yes, I'm sure I may just." His method cleared, like my own. He responded to my remarks with readiness and in good chosen phrases. Had he much to do there? Sure, that was to claim. He had sufficient responsibility to endure. However, exactness and watchfulness have been what was once required of him and of exact work. Manual labor he had subsequent to none. To change that sign, to trim these lights, and to show his iron handle now and then, was all he needed to do beneath that head. Related to these many long and lonely hours which I perceived to make so much, he would handiest say that the activities of his life had shaped itself into that type, and he had grown used to it. He had taught himself a language down right here, if most effective to comprehend it by using sight, and to have fashioned his own crude ideas of its pronunciation, would be referred to as finding out it. He had additionally worked at fractions and decimals, and tried somewhat algebra. But he used to be, and has been as a boy, a terrible hand at figures. Was it integral for him, when on obligation, consistently to remain in that channel of damp air, and might he in no way rise into the sunshine from between those high stone partitions? Why, that depended upon occasions and circumstances. Under some conditions there can be less upon the road than beneath others, and the same held just right as to detail the hour and day of night time. In a bright climate he did opt for occasions for getting a little bit above these reduced shadows, however, being consistently liable to be called by way of his electric bell, and at such instances listening for it with redoubled nervousness. The remedy used to be lower than I'd believe. He took me into his box, where there used to be a fire, a desk for a reputable e-book wherein he had to make distinct entries, a telegraphic instrument with its dial, face, and needles, and the little bell of which he had spoken. On my trusting that he would excuse the comment that he had been well proficient, and, I hoped I would say without offense, maybe educated above that station, he located that instances of moderate incongruity in such intelligence would not often be found trying amongst gigantic bodies of guys, that he had heard it used to be so in workhouses, in the police force, even in that last determined useful resource, the military, and that he knew it was so, roughly, in any nice railway employees. He had been, when younger, if I would think it, sitting in that hut, he scarcely might, a pupil of normal philosophy, and had attended lectures. However, he had run wild, misused his opportunities, long passed down, and in no way risen again. He had no complaint to present about that. He had made his bed, and he lay upon it. It used to be far too late to make another. All that I have here condensed he mentioned in a quiet manner, together with his grave dark regards divided between me and the hearth. He drew the sword, sir, occasionally, and principally, when he noted his early life, as if to request me to have an understanding of that he claimed to be nothing but what I found him. He was once several times interrupted by means of the little bell, and needed to read off messages and ship replies. Once he had to stand without the door and display a flag as a instruct passed, and make some verbal communique with the motive force. In the discharge of his duties, I found him to be remarkably specific and vigilant, breaking off his discourse at a syllable, and ultimate silent until what he needed to do was carried out. In a word, I will have to set this man down as some of the safest of men to be employed in that ability. But for the circumstance that even he was once talking to me, he twice broke off with fallen color, grew to become his face toward the little bell when it did not ring, opened the door of the hut, which used to be kept shut to exclude the unhealthy damp, and regarded out closer to the crimson light near the mouth of the tunnel. On each of these occasions he got there again to the fireplace with the inexplicable air upon him which I had remarked, without being capable to divine, once we have been this far asunder. Stated I, after I rose to go away him, you nearly make me believe that I've met with a contented man. I'm afraid I have to renown that I mentioned it to steer him on. I believe I was so, he rejoined, with the low voice where he had first spoken, but I am, sir, I'm afflicted. He would have recalled the phrases, if he would. He had mentioned them, nevertheless, and that I took them up quickly. With what? What is your problem? It is extremely complicated to impart, sir. It is extremely, very complex to communicate of. If ever you make me yet another talk over with you, I'll try to inform you. However, I expressly need to make you one other consult with. Say when shall or not it's. I'm going off early within the morning, and I will be once more at 10 tomorrow night. I will come at 11. He thanked me and went out the door with me. I'll exhibit my white light, sir, he stated, to this odd low voice, till you may have discovered the way in which up you probably have determined it. Don't call out, and when you find yourself at the prime, don't name out. His manner appeared to make the situation strike chillier to me. However, I stated not more than, very well. And while you come right down tomorrow night, don't call out. Let me ask you a parting question. What made you cry, "Hullo, below," tonight? Heaven knows, mentioned I cried whatever to that outcome. To not that outcome, sir. These were the very phrases. I do know them good. Admit these have been the very words I said them, surely, on the grounds that I noticed you beneath. For no other purpose? What other reason would I most likely have? You had no feeling that they had been conveyed to you in any supernatural way? No. He wished me just right night time, and held up his mild. I walked by the part of the down line of rails with an extraordinarily disagreeable sensation of a coach coming in the back of me, unless I found the path. It was once less complicated to mount than to descend, and I acquired back to my lodge with none journey. Punctual to my appointment, I positioned my foot on the primary notch of the zigzag next night time, as the distant clocks had been placing 11. He was once waiting for me at the bottom, along with his white mild on. "I've not called out," I mentioned, when we came to shut together. "May I communicate now?" "Through all means, sir. Good night, then, and right here's my hand." "Just right night time, sir, and here's mine." With that we walked side via side to his box, entered it, closed the door, and sat down by using the fire. "I have made up my intellect, sir," he began, bending forward as quickly as we were seated, and talking in a tone, however, a little bit above a whisper, "that you just shall no longer must ask me twice what troubles me. I took you for someone else the day past evening. That troubles me." "That mistake?" "No, that's someone else." "Who is it?" "I don't recognize." "Like me?" "I don't comprehend. I in no way notice the face. The left arm is throughout the face, and the right arm is violently waved, this way." I adopted this motion with my eyes, and it used to be the motion of an arm gesticulating, with the utmost ardor and vehemence. "For God's sake, clear the best way." "One moonlight night time," mentioned the man, "I was sitting here. Once I heard a voice cry, 'Hullo, under there!' I began up, looked up from that door, and saw this someone else standing by the crimson gentle close, the tunnel, waving, as I just now showed you. The voice gave the impression hoarse with shouting, and it cried, 'Seem out, appear out,' and then again, 'Hullo, under there! Look out!' I caught up my lamp, turned it on crimson, and ran closer to the figure, calling, 'What's mistaken? What's occurred?' The place? It stood just outside the blackness of the tunnel. I developed so close upon it that I questioned at its maintaining the sleeve across its eyes. I ran right up at it, had my hand stretched out to drag the sleeve away, when it used to be long past." "Into the tunnel?" mentioned I. "No, I ran on into the tunnel, 500 yards. I stopped, and held my lamp above my head, and noticed the figures of the measured distance. I saw the wet stains stealing down the walls and trickling by way of the arch. I ran out once more turbo than I had run in, for I had a moral abhorrence of the position upon me, and I regarded all around the crimson mild with my own purple mild, and I went up the iron ladder to the gallery atop of it, and that I got here down again, and ran again here. I telegraphed each ways, an alarm has been given. Is something incorrect? The answer I got here back both approaches, all well." Resisting the sluggish touch of a frozen finger tracing out my spine, I showed him how that this determined have to be a deception of his feel of sight, and the way that figures originating in disease of the tender nerves that minister to the capabilities of the attention were known to have usually bothered sufferers, a few of whom had emerged as mindful as the character of their soreness, and had even proved it by using experiments upon themselves, as to an imaginary cry. Do, however, listen for a second to the wind on this unnatural alley whilst we converse so low, and the wild harp it makes of the telegraph wires." "That was once all very well," he returned, after we had sat listening for a while, and he must comprehend whatever of the wind and wires. He who so on most cases passed lengthy wintry weather nights here on my own and observing, but he would beg to comment that he had not completed. I requested his pardon, and slowly delivered these phrases, touching my arm. "Within 6 hours after the looks, the memorable accident on this line happened, and within 10 hours the useless and wounded had been brought alongside by the way of the tunnel, over the spot the place of the figure had stood. Disagreeable shudder crept over me, however. I did my satisfactory towards it. I used to be not to be denied. I rejoined that this used to be an amazing accident, calculated deeply to provoke his intellect. But it used to be unquestionable that incredible coincidences did constantly arise, and so they must be taken into account in coping with this sort of area. Although, to be certain, I ought to admit, I introduced, for I suggest, I noticed that he was once going to carry the objection to undergo upon me, men of original field didn't permit such for coincidences in making the traditional calculations of life. He again begged me to comment that he had now not finished. I once more begged his pardon for being betrayed into interruptions. This, he said, once more laying his hand upon my arm, and glancing over his shoulder with hollow eyes, was once just 12 months ago, 6 or 7 months past, and I had recovered from the shock when one morning, because of the day was breaking, I, standing at the door, appeared in the direction of the Red Mild, and noticed the spectre again. He stopped, with a fixed appear at me. Did it cry out? No, it used to be silent. Did it wave its arm? No, it leaned towards the shaft of light with its each fingers earlier than the face, like this. Another time I followed his action with my eyes. It used to be an action of mourning. I've seen such in perspective in stone figures on tombs. Did you go as much as it? I came in and sat down, partly to acquire my thoughts, partly, seeing that it had become me faint, when I went to the door once more. Daylight was once above me, and the ghost was gone. But nothing followed? Nothing got here of this? He touched me on the arm, along with his forefinger, twice or thrice, giving me a ghastly nod at any time when. That very day, as a teach came out of the tunnel, I noticed, at a carriage window on my part, what gave the look of confusion of hands and heads, and something waved. I saw it just in time to sign the driver, stop. He shut off and put his brake on, but the teach drifted prior here 150 yards or more. I ran after it, and, as I went alongside, heard horrible screams and cries. A gorgeous younger woman had died immediately in some of the compartments, and was once brought in right here, and laid down on this floor between us. Involuntarily I pushed my chair back as I appeared from the boards, at which he pointed to himself. True, sir, true, precise, because it occurred, so I inform it you. I would suppose of nothing to say to any intent, and my mouth was once very dry. The wind and the wires took up the story with an extended lamenting wail. He resumed, Now, sir, mark this, and choose how my intellect is bothered. The spectre came back every week in the past, ever considering the fact that it has been there every so often through suits and begins. On the gentle? On the danger light. What does it seem to do? He repeated, if viable with accelerated ardor and vehemence, that former gesticulation of, for God's sake, clear the best way. Then he went on, I have no peace or rest for it. It calls to me, for many minutes together in an agonized manner. Under there, seam out, appear out, it stands waving to me. It rings my little bell. I caught at that. Did it ring your bell the day gone by night after I was here, and I also you went to the door? Twice. Why, see, said I, how your imagination misleads you. My eyes have been on the bell, and my ears have been open to the bell, and if I am a residing man, I did not ring at those times, no, nor at any other time, except when it used to be rung by the usual direction of physical matters by the station speaking with you. He shook his head. I've on no account made a mistake as to but that, sir. I have on no account pressured the spectre's ring with the man's. The ghost's ring is an unusual vibration within the bell that it derives from nothing else, and I've now not asserted that the bell stirs to the attention. I don't wonder that you simply failed to listen to it. However, I heard it. And did the spectre appear to be there when you looked out? It was once there, both occasions. He repeated firmly, both instances. Will you come to the door with me and appear for it now? He bit his below lip as if he were slightly unwilling, but arose. I opened the door and stood on the step, even as he stood in the doorway. There used to be a threat gentle. There used to be a dismal mouth of the tunnel. There have been the high, moist stone walls of the reducing. There were the celebrities above them. Do you see it? I asked him, taking the exact beware of his face. His eyes had been astounding and strained, but now not very far more so, possibly, than my own had been after I had distracted them earnestly in the direction of the same spot. No, he whispered. It isn't there. Agreed, said I. We went in again, shut the door, and resumed our seats. I used to be considering how fine to improve this talents, if it might be referred to as one, when he took up the conversation in the sort of topic of path means. So assuming that there might be no serious question of fact between us, that I felt myself positioned in the weakest of positions. Via this time you're going to absolutely realize, sir, he said, that what troubles me so dreadfully is the query, what does the spectre imply? I used to be now not definite, I advise him, that I did entirely understand. What's its warning in opposition to? He said, ruminating with his eyes upon the fireplace. And only through instances turning them on me. What is the danger? The place is the threat. There's threat overhanging somewhere on the road. Some dreadful calamity will happen. It's not to be doubted this third time, after what has long passed earlier than. However, undoubtedly, it is a merciless haunting of me. What am I able to do? He pulled out his handkerchief and wiped the drops from his heated brow. If I telegraph danger on either aspect of me, or on both, I will be able to provide no purpose for it, he went on, wiping the hands of his hands. I will have to get into trouble, and do no excellent. They would feel I was once mad, that this way in which I might work. Message, hazard, take care, answer, what threat, where, message, don't recognize, however, for God's sake, take care. They'd displace me. What else might they do? His ache of intellect was once most pitiable to peer. It was once the mental torture of a conscientious man, oppressed beyond patience by means of an unintelligible responsibility involving lifestyles. When it first stood below the chance mild, he went on, striking his darkish hair back from his head and drawing his hands outward across his temples in an extremity of feverish distress. Why no longer inform me where that accident was to happen? If it ought to occur, why not tell me the way it would be averted, if it would had been averted? When, on its second coming, it hid its face, why not inform me, as a substitute, she's going to die? Let them preserve her at dwelling, if it came, on those two occasions, most effective to show me that its warnings had been actual, and so as to put together me for the third, why not warn me, it appears, that evidently now, and I, Lord help me, a mere poor sign-man on this solitary station, why now not go to someone with credit score to be believed, and energy to behave? After I noticed on him this state, I saw, for a terrible man's sake, as well as for the general public security, that I had to do for the time was once to compose his mind. Hence, environment aside all query of truth or unreality between us, I represented to him that whoever absolutely discharged his responsibility need to do good, and that as a minimum it used to be his comfort that he understood his responsibility, although he didn't understand these confounding appearances. In this effort I succeeded as ways better than within the attempt to cause him out of his conviction. He grew to be calm. The occupations incidental to this put up because the night developed commenced to make larger needs on his concentration, and I left him at 2 a.m. I had provided to remain throughout the night time. However, he would no longer hear of it. That I greater than as soon as regard again on the crimson gentle as I ascended the pathway, that I did just like the pink gentle, and that I must have slept poorly if my bed had been below it, I see no reason to conceal, nor did I admire the 2 sequences of the accident and the useless lady. I see no rationale to conceal that both. However, what ran most in my thoughts was once the consideration how I ought to act, having come to be the recipient of this disclosure. I had proved the person to be wise, vigilant, painstaking, and unique, but how lengthily he would remain so in this state of mind. Though in a subordinate role, none the less, he held a major trust. He would, for illustration, like to stake my own lifestyles on the probabilities of his continuing to execute it with precision. Unable to beat a feeling that there would be whatever treacherous in my communicating what he had instructed me to his superiors in the enterprise, without first being undeniable with himself and proposing a core direction to him, I ultimately resolved to offer to accompany him, in any other case keeping his secret for the reward, to the wisest medical practitioner we could hear of in those materials, and to take his opinion. A metamorphosis, in his time of responsibility, would come around next night time. He had apprised me. He can be off an hour or 2 after sunrise, and on again quickly after sunset. I had appointed to come back consequently. Subsequent night was a beautiful night, and I walked out early to revel in it. The sun was once not but really down when I traversed the disciplined direction, close to the top of the deep cutting. I extended my walk for an hour. I mentioned to myself, half an hour on and half an hour back, it might be time to head to my signalman's field. Before perusing my stroll, I stepped to the brink, and mechanically seemed down from the factor from which I had first obvious him. I are not able to describe the joys that seized upon me when, close at the mouth of the tunnel, I noticed the appearance of a person, together with his left sleeve across his eyes, passionately waving his proper arm. The nameless horror that oppressed me passed in a second, for in a second I saw that this appearance of a person was a man certainly, and that there was once a group of different guys standing at a short distance to whom he gave the look to be rehearsing the gesture made. The risk mild was now not yet lighted. Against its shaft, light low hut, wholly new to me, had been made of some wooden supports and tarpaulin. It seemed no larger than a bed. With an irresistible experience that something was once mistaken, with a flashing, self-reproachful fear that fatal mischief had come from my leaving the man there, and inflicting no one to be sent to miss or proper what he did, I descended the notched course with the entire pace I could make. "What's the subject?" I asked the men. "Signalman killed this morning, sir." "Not the person belonging to that box?" "Yes, sir." "No longer the man I know?" "You are going to realize him, sir, in case you knew him," mentioned the person who spoke for the others, solemnly uncovering his own head and raising a finish of tarpaulin, for the face is fairly composed. "Oh, how did this happen? How did this occur?" I asked, turning from one to an additional, because the hut closed in once more. "He was lower by an engine, sir. No man in England knew his work better. However, by some means he used to be now not clear of the outer rail. It was once simply at broad day. He had struck the sunshine and had the lamp in his hand. Because the engine got there out of the tunnel, his back was once in the direction of her, and he or she reduced him down. That man drove her, and was once showing us the way it occurred. Exhibit the gentleman Tom. The man who wore a hard, darkish dress stepped back to his former location on the mouth of the tunnel. Coming circular the curve in the tunnel, sir, he mentioned. I noticed him on the end, like as if I noticed him down a point of view of glass. There used to be no time to investigate the velocity, and that I knew him to be very cautious. As he didn't appear to take heed of the whistle, I shut it off when we have been jogging down upon him, and referred to him as loud as I might call. What did you say? I said, Beneath there, appear out, seam out, for God's sake, clear the way in which. I began, it used to be a dreadful time, sir. I never felt that off calling to him. I put his arm earlier than my eyes not to see, and that I waved this arm to the final. Nevertheless, it was once little heed. Without prolonging the narrative to dwell on any one of its curious instances greater than any other, I may just, in closing it, point out the twist of fate that the warning of the engine driver integrated. Now not best the words which the unfortunate signalman had repeated to me as haunting him, but also to the words which I personally, no longer he, had hooked up, and that only in my possessed intellect, to the gesticulation he had intimated. Thank you for listening.